Welcome, everybody. So welcome to the third annual Kenneth Frampton Endowed Lecture, which is really the highlight of our academic year. And it's just wonderful that you're here. Students are nervous because you present your projects in about 2 weeks. The architects in the room are nervous because what's happening with our world. I mean, we're all nervous. And we have every reason to be, you could say. But of course, architecture schools shelter a form of optimism about the future of society, perhaps a naive form of optimism, but it's here and it's palpable in this room, and certain figures act as magnets for that kind of critical optimism, and of course Kenneth is exactly such a figure. So it's no surprise on such a nervous night that everybody's here for the Frampton Lecture. Kenneth selects the speaker and responds to the speakers in his uniquely thoughtful way. And I think this is the way it's always been with Kenneth. He has always thoughtfully responded. And this goes a long way back to his first writings in London, his first publications, his leadership as a writer, as a thinker, as a colleague, as a teacher. At some moment, he jumped across the Atlantic, spent a while in Princeton, saw the good sense of coming to Columbia University, and this place has been lucky ever since. But of course, it's not quite, I'm only really saying half the story. That is to say, of course, Kenneth is the most thoughtful of responders to the work of architects, but for a very long time it's been the other way around, that architects have been trying to be thoughtfully responding to the work of Kenneth. And of course, anyway, it's a conversation between architects because Kenneth unambiguously speaks with the thought and hope, you could say, of an architect. And now it's really no longer clear who's responding to who. And I think this lecture series exactly honors this spirit of architect to architect, writer to designer, some confusion about who's leading and who's following, but as it were, clinging quite closely together, even intimately together, trying to understand in which way, what could be the things that we would do with the built environment which would, as it were, honor the thought that we could live in a better society. So some kind of conversation about the relationship between objects and society. Again, objects and society being inseparable. You could say it, and it's obvious to say, but Kenneth is unambiguously an architect who builds with words and allows architects to understand in which way their buildings also operate as a kind of words, as articulate. It is the most ordinary, the most obvious, the most classical, and I think the most correct understanding of architecture, that architecture is articulate building, that is to say, building that rises to the level of discourse, that makes one hesitate in everyday life, and for a moment at least, consider the potential of living in a better society. And Kenneth has dedicated himself to that possibility of a building becoming articulate as a building, not as something else, but as it were, speaking for itself in the name of society. So it's a super special night to gather together to celebrate Kenneth, and thereby to celebrate what he represents, which is simply thoughtful dialogue between architects. Thoughtful dialogue understood to have a relationship to the dialogue between objects and society, therefore to what it is that brings us together in this room. I don't need to tell you this, but maybe Kenneth needs to hear it one more time. He's simply the most famous and most admired historian on the planet. It did occur to me that there may be other planets that consider consider Kenneth to be a role model. And Kenneth is the kind of person that would accept probably an invitation to get into some sort of space shuttle to write the first book on the kind of the way in which people on Mars have made their own particular variation of modern architecture. It's always like that, and I think somehow Kenneth is always ahead and always a bit younger than us, which is getting to be annoying. This ability to be not just forever young, but forever younger. And by the way, it's a good evening to celebrate Kenneth because it's his birthday. He's 83 years old as of tonight, which is a really good start, I think. You know, in many states, it's illegal to look as good as Kenneth does in his 83rd year. Again, another way to be annoying. I think that people used to be annoyed with his writing because it seemed right what he was saying, and it's really difficult to read somebody who consistently seems to be right. It's much worse when they do so with grace. And to annoy people with grace, it's a talent. It's a talent. I say all this, and there's not enough can be said about the luckiness that we have in being with Kenneth. Although it has to be said also that Kenneth is in the office next to me, and basically everybody on the universe walks into his office, has lunch, talks with him. The world is flowing through his office, which means also that the world is flowing through Columbia and vice versa. So to some extent, the fact that Kenneth has residence here as our most eminent historian, it's almost inconsequential in a sense because his true residence is in the field as the field's most eminent historian. And you can smell this in the choice of his favorite people to come and give a lecture, and particularly tonight with Yvonne and Shelley of Grafton Architects, who since 1978 have been doing such extraordinary work, both as architects and as teachers, probably a little bit less as teachers now that you are being asked to rebuild so many buildings around the world. Extraordinarily careful work, highly celebrated. I mean, I think if you could win a prize, I mean, to win the prize for the World Building of the Year would seem a pretty good start in 2008. But also I think the Silver Lion at the Venice Biennale, these matter a lot. These are collegial awards to colleagues with admiration. But this is surrounded by countless awards. Again, it would only be to trivialize the work you're about to see to try to describe it, but there is an extraordinary sensitivity to the complex relationships between local and global, which is, of course, also the hallmark of Kenneth's work. So, of course, it seems inevitable, natural, that we would be here together tonight. And I think they're going to talk about this tonight and talk about exactly what it means to be lost in translation, whether from Dublin or New Zealand. I can tell you that's really the big issue all the time. And sometimes it's just lovely that things are lost in translation. In fact, you could argue that if things were never lost in translation, why would we bother to live on this planet? Like, why would we bother to live in cities where you always, every day, meet somebody different, moving in a different direction, someone you always will misunderstand? But the living together with those people you don't know is exactly what society is. So if architecture is that which cherishes the thought of living together in society, in a certain sense it treasures lost in translation. It treasures the silences and the gaps. The question is, how does one show this in architecture? How does this become articulate? And I really do think that of so many architects in the world, this brilliant team has found a way to do that, and that's why those awards come. It's just you go to the treasure of the field. So it's from one treasure to another. And on behalf of Kenneth and the school, I'm really, really pleased to welcome you back to a room that you have always felt so much at home in, and I hope you feel the same way tonight.
Thank you, Dean, for those very kind words. Is this on? Yes. Good evening. It is a real pleasure and a deep honor to be here in New York, invited to give the Kenneth Frampton Endowed Lecture. We were invited with a strange and unusual request to identify and embrace our professional alter egos. Embedded in the various emails that crossed the Atlantic regarding this lecture was an amazing gift to us, the name of Studs Terkel. We were told about his book, Working, in which Studs Terkel says that the stories that comprise his books are about the search for daily meaning as well as daily bread, for recognition as well as cash, for astonishment rather than torpor, in short, a sort of life rather than a Monday through Friday sort of dying. First of all, we rejected the discussion of the alter ego, seeing the alter ego as a type of intrusive luxury, as a sitting on the shoulder interfering voice, as the other, the divided self, the notion that there was another you, another paralleled wish-for self that was not something we admire or want to sustain. I just move the next one. The alter ego request reminded us of a play by Brian Friel, Philadelphia, Here I Come, which was written in the 1960s, where Friel uses the device of two actors playing the role of one person called Gar. One plays Gar public and the other plays Gar private. Charles Isherwood in the New York Times in 2005 describes this character, Gar, as being, and I quote, torn between his superego and his id, a melancholy pas de deux that proves potent theatrical form to the eternal tug-of-war that we are all engaged in, between the outer self, strictly conforming to social norms, and the restless consciousness it harbors. Colm Tóibín, the Irish writer, writing in The Guardian newspaper in 2012 about this same play, discusses the work of this writer, whose characters' words often conceal as much as they reveal, fascinated by the figure in exile from self, or from community, or from family, and indeed from language itself. Tóibín uses the term trapped in silence. Our Irish theatrical tradition historically depended almost entirely on the medium of words, on language. In another of Brian Friel's plays, called Translations, there were two languages, one Irish and the other English, which operate against each other and within each other. This play, Translations, is about mapping and renaming of territory, but it is also about the loss of the Irish language and the consequent loss of meaning, where characters slowly manage to communicate despite language rather than because of it. We see architecture as the silent language that speaks. We have chosen interpreter, as this title refers to the role of architect as translator of need into built work, into the silent language of space. For us specifically, it refers to the translation of language into built form that highlights nuance and accent, place and culture, texture and character, rather than Google Translate architecture. We are interested in the language of place, believing now more than ever before that architecture's critical role is to claim space, to claim each particular coordinate on this fragile planet, emphasizing and highlighting what is specific in geographical, climatic, and cultural terms. Based in Dublin, our oral tradition, our delight in story, in metaphor, in playing with language, encourages us to dig deeply to uncover the potential story within each new project, to find the hidden dream, the unspoken wish, to listen to what is being said, to imagine. In the British Museum in London earlier this year, there was a wonderful exhibition curated by Jill Cook called Ice Age Art, The Arrival of the Modern Mind. The exhibition had some of the oldest known images of animals and people in the world: lions, mammoths, dancing girls, mothers, men, and alternative beings were among the drawings and sculptures created by artists during the last ice age, between 40,000 and 100,000 years ago. Quickly made sketches were featured alongside masterpieces. Together they provided a fascinating insight into the earliest modern minds and their capacity to communicate sophisticated ideas symbolically through art. As the prefrontal brain developed, so did our ability as early humans to symbolize thoughts, to develop abstraction, to caricature, and to make metaphor. Investment in art was a measure of its social value, as it still is today. The Lion Man from Stadel Cave in southwest Germany is 12 inches tall. It is made from a tusk of a young mammoth by someone with knowledge and experience of working this difficult material, which is a hard compound of mineral calcium crystals held together by organic collagen. Tusks grow around a hollow known as a pulp cavity. The form of this half man, half lion, this is a mythical character, was conceived to make the best use of the characteristics of ivory. So here we have the imagined, the preconceived form, the understanding of the material and craftsmanship to carry out this task. It has taken over 400 hours to make it. Someone imagined this on behalf of a community and manufactured this artwork of symbolic importance. Somebody interpreted on behalf of the group. The reason to think about this Lion Man is that this process of imagining, this making of something of symbolic interest, of significance, is what all art and what architecture continues to do. Imagining something before it exists is what makes us human. Imagining and planning and making and doing all of these things to the best of our abilities creates our contemporary society with its own unique values. Like our Ice Age ancestors, imagining is what makes us human. Imagining is the act of interpreting on behalf of others, of finding meaning, of interpreting dreams and wishes, from mammoth tusk to concrete and chepo, from limestone to rock. Remembering Studs Terkel's words, searching for daily meaning as well as daily bread, for recognition as well as cash, for astonishment rather than torpor, for a sort of life rather than the Monday through Friday sort of dying. In our own work, when we search for meaning, we listen, we imagine, we make. This evening we begin discussing our own work with these hieroglyphics, what we call diagrams of intent. These secret, enigmatic symbols form a type of DNA of our projects, where we're searching for the hidden code, which will hold a new world together. This allows us to understand, to speculate, to find the measure, to imagine, to represent people's dreams, to find a synthesis of form, encapsulating cultural as well as functioning realities, searching for meaning. The first sketch on the top left, this one here, is a sketch for the UTEC University in Lima, Peru, showing a leaning structure and cascading levels. Our sketch here, which we shared with Mendes de Rocha when preparing for the Venice Biennale, in which the horizontal line here represents the theme of common ground, which was set by David, where the lines hanging below these here represent the timber foundations that cling into the earth in Venice, to the mud below. Venice, which Mendes de Rocha calls the capital of the imagined world. Building below and above ground of Mendes de Rocha's work. And then these two here represent Machu Picchu and Skellig Michel, which are obviously Machu Picchu is in Peru, and Skellig Michel is an island off the southwest coast of Ireland. And we have become intrigued by the similarities between Skellig Michel and Machu Picchu. These are built centuries apart, geographically thousands of kilometers apart, culturally apart, but they somehow tell the same story, that of humanity's tender clinging to this earth. These stone man-made complexes counterpoint the intimate with the magnificent landscape, mountain, valley, cliff, and ocean. These initial sketches for the Bocconi, University in Milan. This is where we have offices for 1,000 professors held above the carved earth, corrupting the groundscape of Milan. The initial sketches for Toulouse, this university which is being built at the moment in Toulouse in southwest France, with its central 21st century courtyard, a vertical fulcrum which holds the organization, the DNA of this project in Toulouse.
Excuse me. Yvonne has spoken about interpreting, and we're also obviously going to speak about tradition. And what was really interesting about that same Biennale, Common Ground, was the contribution that Fulvio Irace made in relation to Milan. And we were really moved and struck and impressed by this, because he was talking about the cohesion of the rebuilding of Milan after the Second World War, and where architects as varied as Gio Ponti, Ernesto Rogers, Caccia di Mignoni, Mangiarotti, and many others came together to rebuild a city in a very varied and rich way, but in a cohesive way. And he quotes Ernesto Rogers, tradition as an act of collective awareness. But he also talked about the word continuity, or continuità in Italian, and how that relates to the word translation. In Italian has two meanings. It has a double meaning, which is to transfer or to betray. And he makes the case that in the translation of language, that there's a certain betrayal required in order to preserve the purity of the language. And we found this very interesting in the context maybe of a quote from Kenneth, which we've often go back to, which is, quote, "I believe there is no significant innovation without tradition, and there is no living tradition without innovation." This is Grafton Street in Dublin, where we got our name from. And we're based and rooted in Ireland and in Dublin. And we feel this anchoring more and more important, in this anchoring in the physical and cultural life of our own place when we're working in foreign places. And I suppose that's something the translator always says, is that to translate language, you need to go deeper into your own language. What we find working in our own city, where we're completely familiar, is the task of rediscovering in a fresh way your own place. These Georgian streets, the brick squares of Dublin, with which we're so familiar. Sometimes we find the description by a writer gives us back those streets in a very fresh way. The Anglo-Irish writer talks about the steep red brick cliffs of these street walls, and she talks about the way that the colour of the brick seems to seal up the orangeness in the way that an unopened orange seals up the juice. And somehow that kind of description of a familiar street wall helps us to do what Louis Barragan says is the primary role of the architect, which is to see with innocence. And in this building in Dublin, the Department of Finance, Dublin is a city of houses, and the houses, in the 18th century Dublin, the houses are built in brick and the public buildings are built in stone. And this public building we've built in stone with the same rhythm and light and shade rhythm that exists in the Dublin streets. But like Samuel Beckett, who talked about foreign language leading him to the primal, we also need foreign influences and inspiration. And when we were doing the Department of Finance, we found this amazing project in Stockholm by Celsing. And what we were astonished by was the fact that it's a corporate building which has a kind of prehistoric presence, and it feels like a piece of geology which somehow resonates with some kind of strange landscape of the countryside and also of the city. And the way that it's crafted and built, I suppose, has stayed with us as a kind of conscience in terms of thinking about building not just as building, but as pieces of geology or pieces of geography. And building in the west of Ireland, which we've been doing for the last number of years, doing a university in Limerick, we find ourselves building in the county of Clare, which is the image on the left, which is a limestone county with the karst burren landscape. And on the right-hand side is Limerick City, which is a city of Georgian streets and squares. And where we're building is on the River Shannon, north of this great big river, with the orthogonal established university south of the river, which resonates with the city of Limerick. And in this more rural agrarian landscape, we were asked to make a new public space which would complete a suite of existing buildings. Building in a greenfield site and trying to build a public space in a greenfield site, we found to be a real challenge. Missing the containment and cohesion of the city, we found ourselves drawing on other influences and other resources as varied as Alvar Aalto, in the way that somehow he allows the contours of the landscape to wash up against buildings like a kind of shoreline. And on the other hand, something like Louis Kahn's Salk, where there's a kind of heroic quality, and the largeness of the landscape seems to be held by the way the buildings sit on the ground. We were also comforted by what traditional Irish musicians say when they're talking about music. They say that it's not just the notes that count, but it's the space between the notes. And they must know about architecture, because in a sense that's what we feel is it's this, especially in this case, that it's the space between the notes that we had to really concentrate on. And the notes are the university student accommodation building which we designed, a new medical school, an existing building which deals with health sciences, a music school, and a sports building. So we were trying to bring those disparate things together to make a sense of civic space in what is the countryside. And we were thinking about a number of things in designing housing side by side with its partner, which is an institutional, more academic institutional building. And the housing we thought about as a large-scale house which would have a sense of domesticity, but at the same time would have the ability to have a kind of civic presence. And on the other hand, we were thinking about the medical school as a piece of limestone which would be the centerpiece around which the other buildings would rotate. In terms of the way we made walls, we thought about these walls as splaying and adjusting themselves to the contours. And on the other hand, we were thinking about the stone as a kind of open weave which could make colonnades for people to gather. But we were also thinking about weather, about the wind and the rain and the growing force of the winds and the rains in the west of Ireland, and that we have to build in a very robust way in this climate, which is quite different to the way that one builds in other climates. So the colonnade acts as a social element, but it also acts as a protector, and the folding and weaving of the facades is as much to do about weather as it is about the social function of these thresholds and edges. And the medical school somehow takes a center point, and it feels like the other buildings are rotating around this kind of building which is made out of the material on which it is placed. And it stands very firmly on the ground. And we were also interested in the idea of making intimate subspaces within the larger scale of the civic space, and making these houses penetrable with passages and archways and places for people to linger. So the kind of pair of buildings, the brick wall, which is a brick used in the university, the student housing, which has all its living accommodation facing the public space and all its bedrooms facing away to the more private world of the landscape, with these archways through for movement, pedestrian movement, and with these external these external entrances for students to bring their bicycles and arrive in protection from the climate. And the medical school, on the other hand, is a very loose array of columns and beams and colonnades and folded edges, and has a different presence, but we hope that they are complementary. And the work that we put into making it's to do with the intent of the architecture, but it is also to do with climate. And I suppose that's something we're acutely aware of working in other countries, is how climate affects form and how it affects the architecture. There's a piece by David Leatherbarrow, which we really like, where he talks about thresholds and edges, and that the manipulation of light and temperature at the edges of buildings, that it has a social significance. And that's something we find really interesting to think about, that it's not just about making elevations or walls or surfaces, but that especially in the thing of trying to make new space, that perhaps the way the buildings touch the ground and the way you make the edges can in some way facilitate or encourage social activity. And this medical school is like a big vessel. It's 60 meters long and it's 30 meters wide and it's 18 meters high, and it's carved from the top down and from the edges in, and it consists of lecture theatres, study spaces and laboratories which feel like architecture studios, and tiny offices and public circulation. So we work very much in section, especially in educational buildings where there's always this wish for social overlap. And here we get the sense of the weight of the roof meeting the weight of the wall, and again the importance of the staircase in all educational projects as a place of meeting and a space of social overlap. And this thing of the intimacy within the bigger project, the little subspaces which frame and make connections between the parts.
So this evening we are talking to you about us as interpreters, and this is the first beginning sketches of the competition in Milan for the Bocconi University. And what was for us, I suppose, an amazing thing in this competition, which was for 1,000 professors, an aula magna for 1,000 people, a number of 5 conference halls, was that 20,000 square meters of area was to be below ground. So we began these kind of DNA, thanks Shell, this DNA search to think about what would happen if we took the offices and raised them above a carved earth, that we would not put everything below ground, that we would question that relationship between ground and sky, and that we would think about how the city would penetrate into the university. And in terms of, it's like, I suppose what we call it, architectural legacies. We're also searching in our architectural training and our architectural minds for pieces that are wonderfully made. I mean, I had the pleasure to be in Salk for the first time a couple of years ago, and it's just one of those absolute treasures of architecture. This space held, Shelley was talking about the notes between the silences in music. We've often quoted Alexandre de la Sota, where he says that architects should make as much nothing as possible, and that it's really this void space, the space between, that is the place in which people stand. But for us it was looking at the Salk and its connection, and looking at these amazing churches carved into the ground in Ethiopia. I suppose what was really important for us was also looking at these amazing sketches by Utzon on his travels in the Yucatan, where he where he does these gorgeous drawings in terms of platform, and he embeds those ideas later on in his work in Sydney. But for us, what's amazing in terms of having visited these Mayan pieces in Yucatan is that this is on limestone. And because of the limestone, the trees, which Utzon has sketched here, actually don't grow more than 5 meters because of the relationship of the soil and the rock below. So the Mayans knew this, obviously, that the canopy of trees would not reach beyond a certain point. So these platforms then connect to other platforms in the distance. But as these sketches, as we call them, the kind of DNA, they are things that, I suppose in Utzon's case, he was building up this repertoire which feed deep into an unconscious and then, if you like, resurrect themselves at the appropriate time. So this is this is Milan. The project is based outside the Spanish walls. And for us, this is the plan. Our first assessment of the site, this street, a very noisy and busy street, Viale Blini, a quieter side street, Via Röntgen. The university existed. It wanted to make a connection. Our understanding, if you like, of the embedded wish in this competition was really how to connect the university to the city of Milan. And this plan is really not having the main entrance on the busy street, delaying it to enter in the heart of the new building, allowing students to move through to the existing campus, continuing what we call the stone carpet of Milan, having the main entrance for the 1,000 professors, having their hall here, having shops or cafes in this position, and making 3 carved courtyards, 1, 2, 3. 2 being essentially outside, and the third one carved in an inner space. You move in this project separately into the entrance for the Aula Magna. You drop down 5 meters to the entrance. And we placed the main room, if you like, the main 1,000 person salon between the university and the city. For us then, it was also, Milan was special to us, I suppose, because we felt that we could kind of run architecturally, because for us it was familiar intellectual and architectural territory. This was the rationalist city of Milan. We were asked to make, if you like, not really a building, but a piece of city. And these are the early diagrams describing our, if you like, judgment to say that 1,000 offices needed to have a scale. We would use structure to give definition to that scale, and we would make this labyrinth and raise the 1,000 offices as a type of matrix held above the city floor. And we would use structure. These are the twin diaphragm walls placed at 25 meters apart, and each of these containing the corridors and connections between the offices above. Placing the building into the context of the city of Milan, with its trams, placing the main room on the corner junction. And these is what we describe, I suppose, in terms of metaphor. This is the side elevation, feeling like a cliff of Ceppo, a very ordinary stone of the city of Milan, which we chose because of its beauty and also our understanding of this as geological concrete. And we made the Aula Magna in section so that it has this 22-meter surface, the undercroft of the Aula Magna above, which bears down, has a sense of weighting, it has a sense of mass, making this space which invites people to participate both in the space itself with this above it, but also this 8-meter high window to Milan. So the city is brought into the building and people are aware of the city. So we have this, if you like, dialogue between these two spaces. And also in terms of structure, for us, I suppose the main thing about structure is that it liberates, these are 3 levels, street level, -5 and 9 meters below, which for us is lightened by the stone. We changed from Ceppo to Biancolazza, which is a beautiful white stone, and we discovered that light can bounce at 9 meters below. And these structure allows us to intertwine and interconnect. And talking about, if you like, climate and place, we were rather disappointed, I suppose, when we came to look at the site. We always had seen Milan in blue sky days, and you realize that Milan has no river, has no sea, is foggy, and has this kind of sense of time that you can't tell what time of day it is when the fog sets in. And we place the building in this position with what we call this, if you like, window to Milan. I think in Kenneth's description he described it also as a lantern. So it meant that as a citizen, as you went home on the tram, that you could have a picture, you could have a relationship to this institution by peering in this window. And this is a beautiful project by Mendes de Rocha. It's a church called St. Peter's. And what for us was amazing was this hovering mass of the church held over this water. And it has two characteristics, mass bearing down and also the lightness of this project, where the community is held on this incredible cantilever over the water with this kind of crystal relationship to the outside. And for us, this is looking on a wet night in Milan, looking in through the 8-meter window down at the life of the university, participating, if you like, in the life of the city. And this image for us, we're presenting this, if you like, enigmatic image tonight because it's something we'd like to discuss, because it's not really an image, it's really a framework in which life happens. And buildings grow old and they experience the elements, and they are required to last. And they're not just the shiny first photographs in magazines. And the reason why we put this image here is that in the same way as the media supports the visual, it supports the eye as the arbitrator of so-called beauty, this iconic piece. We know as architects that architecture is a full bodily experience. And we have to challenge the visual and champion the experiential. That architecture is about the body and eyes, ears, nose, skin, the total thing, and we walk through it and we feel spaces with our whole bodies. And on behalf of the community, we also have to judge that experience. So it's really saying that we're not discussing only image tonight, we also want to discuss framework and the possibility of life.
I just wanted to say something about that before you moved on. This is a photographer that we love, based in Prague, Sudek, and it's called Nighttime Walk, and he talks about the photographer as a detective walking in the shadows, and that this photograph describes a community of secret individuals. And the reason I wanted Yvonne to just hold for a moment was because in some way it describes the photographer as the detective in the shadows, has a connection with Manuel de Sola Morales, and he talks about the role of the architect being like a detective in the reading of the skin of cities, where he says we have to look for clues in the kind of wrinkles of the skin of cities. And I suppose when you go to a new place, that's what you feel like. You're really searching, looking for clues, like the photographer in the shadows. When we went to Toulouse on the site visit, we were making these sketches on the way home, and there was always an element of terror in a new project, complete confusion, not knowing what on earth you're going to do. And we were making these sketches about education and how you move in educational buildings and the need to move freely. And we were making these sketches about buttresses because we found in Toulouse a lot of these bony, strong brick structures, and we were told by the clients that they really wanted a cool, comfortable building because it hits the 40s in the summertime in Toulouse. And Yvonne was drawing sunflowers, and I have to say I got worried at that point. I thought my partner has lost the plot, but in fact, when you look back on it, there was some sense in it, because she was talking about the thing of the crust at the edge, and it was because we were taking a train from Toulouse to Carcassonne, and the sunflowers were all in the fields. And what we found we did in Toulouse, which is the same brief as Bocconi, only much smaller, which is a school of economics, and where we buried all the lecture theatres in Bocconi because we had to. Here we made the lecture theatres into a kind of a a brick wall where we literally tried to think about these as rooms between which we could make windows at the scale of Toulouse. And then the background rooms were the research offices for the professors, and in between would be the social life of the building. And on this trip, we also went to Albi, which is 1 hour north of Toulouse. And there are certain buildings that change your perception of the potential of architecture. And I think this building was one of those, simply by virtue of its amazing presence. And Louis Kahn visited this building, and when I was watching my architect recently, I could see Albi still in his work in India. This just, I suppose, gave us courage in terms of thinking about how buildings hit the ground, about mass and weight and all of those things. And Toulouse, the map is like a broken heart. It's on the beautiful Garonne River. It also has the Midi Canal. And in this city, we were working on the border between the very small scale intricacies of the old medieval city and the new town. And it's a very picturesque city. It's called the Red City because it's red brick. And it's the opposite to what Milan was in many ways, because it had this completely different quality, this picturesque quality. And Yvonne says we somehow felt more equipped to deal with the challenge of Milan, and felt really at a loss of how to approach making a building in this city. And these are the buttresses that we were drawing, where we found these wonderful surfaces in these churches. And the other thing we loved was in the tiny grain of the medieval city, this tiny, tiny grain, and there's something like 40 secret towers, secret merchant towers in Toulouse. And the biggest window is the window to the sky from these courtyards. So that was something that we tried to hold. And the site is at the prow of what is the university building. The old city is in this area here, and we're at the junction of the old and the new city. So this prow addresses the Midi Canal and the big Garonne River. And so this is the development of this idea of making rooms like big blocks of brick, through which we made terraces, and between which you could make big windows to the city and somehow draw the city into the heart of the building. In this case, we made the actual foyer. In Milan, the foyer space is internal because it gets very cold in the wintertime. But here, all the courtyards we visited were open, and the staircases were gated but open to these courtyards. So the foyer is protected from wind and rain, but it's outside. And I suppose in a sense, just to go back to the plan for 1 second, the other thing was that we found all these brick buttresses. We decided that we needed to make a building which had a sense of mass and presence, but not just because of the surfaces we found, but also because of the climate, that we didn't want to expose all the surfaces of the offices to the heat of the sun. So we used the fire stairs, the escape stairs, as kind of feet, which would make these kind of stake out this territory. And because of this, all the internal movement could be open and free because you were escaping to the edges. And so this study model shows the buttressed edges and a kind of collage of the elements that we found in Toulouse. We call this the sky cloister, which makes the forecourt space between city and the interior world. And then we made these colonnades which connect socializing terraces. And we folded all the surfaces of the walls of the brick for climatic reasons, but also to do with generating surfaces of light and shade. So we see the build-up from the ground to these big blocks of space which are at the front and the smaller offices behind. and the forecourt space, which is the space where we tried to trap that sense of the Toulouse forecourt, where we join these two blocks and make a window to the sky, and make this this threshold space between city and the busy student activity of Place Saint-Pierre. So there's this sequence of space through a slightly ramped entrance up to an internal, sorry, not internal, it's outside to the environment, but it's internal in terms of the life of the university. So you pass through these brick walls into this interior world, the heart of the university, and then the cloister, the sky cloister, connects the professors at the upper level and also makes this forecourt and this window to the sky. And in the interior, then it's a very light, open space with these terraces which relate to the city, and these big openings, these big windows between the big rooms, which somehow we were trying to really draw the beauty of Toulouse right into the heart of this project. And we used a tourist poster as part of the competition to try to see how the building would sit in the picturesque quality of the city, with the strata of the river, of these huge brick walls protecting the city from flooding, the raised boulevards, the skyscape, and we're somehow sitting between those. And just, I suppose, to go off the beaten track for a minute, because we were asked to talk about alter ego and we picked the thing of interpreter, we were thinking how we seem to work in fragments, that we seem to, as architects, I think most architects do, we make collages of fragments of things. And we were looking at photographs recently, and we were realizing that in some ways, photographs capture the reality of our lives, which is moments frozen. And when we think back on times in our lives, we think in fragments, we think in sensations, whether it's to do with smells or conversations, but it's not linear and it's not cohesive. It's a kind of collage of fragments. And we love this quote by A.S. Byatt, where she's talking about having deconstructed texts, cut them up and made collages, and put them together again in a new form, and finding that the words still had some meaning. And she talks about the breathings of the words were interchangeable. And in a way, that in a sense feels like the way that we find ourselves working in terms of influences and the interpreting of traditions and of these influences. And a photograph in our office from a number of years ago where there's this bric-a-brac ranging from our own work to the house in La Plata by Le Corbusier, where somebody gave us a present of this build-your-own model, which we really liked. And it's one, I suppose it's one of a project we keep coming back to and back to. And at the moment on our wall in the office, this bad snapshot taken in dealing with Lima, there's a whole variety of different references which we relate to, ranging from Giancarlo De Carlo, where we were interested in the thing of shade, to the housing in Ivry by Jean Renaudie, because we loved this this loose arrangement of terraces and new ground and pieces of Lima and pieces of Dublin mixed in, and how, like A.S. Byatt's words, the colonnade in Salk, a series of columns by Villanova Artigas, which we discovered just before we did Bocconi, and that somehow again shifted our direction when we discovered the work of these South American architects, because it had another quality in which we didn't see in European work for all kinds of reasons. And going back to our old teacher, Le Corbusier, the staircase on the underside of the Marseille Unité, which is something we're looking at in our Lima project again. But then also thinking about fragments of sensation, going back to Sudeck, and where here he's celebrating what he thinks of as it's a building site in a cathedral in Prague, and he's celebrating the constructivist arrangement of the builders, the bearers of weight within this sacred space. But what this photograph describes to us is the sense of light as liquid. And this pier by Carlos Prata in Porto, is you get the sense of liquid as force needing to be resisted. And then in Lima, where liquid becomes light, when the fog comes down in Lima, which it does for about 70% of the year, the light is so strong that when the fog comes down, you can't open your eyes because because of the refraction of the light in the liquid. So it's something that we're because being architects is a combination of scientific and random, and it's a combination of the scientific and the intuitive. It's very much how you feel in a place, that there's the cultural climate, but there's also the physical climate, and how that affects the way that one builds.
We'd like to talk to you for a short time in relation to the project in Lima, and we put this for a thought: the university as an arena for learning. When we began doing this competition, we had never been to South America. We looked at this amazing city of 8.5 million people, which is 12 degrees south of the equator, but because of the Humboldt current coming up from Antarctica, it has this amazingly benign climate. We also noticed that it had this incredible 40-meter cliffs that divide the city from the Pacific. This is a 20th century city with absolutely chaotic private transport, very little, if you like, public transport. And the project was to make a new university in a place in the city. And what is interesting, I suppose, because we're also in a university here, the making of a project is also the understanding, when we talk about interpreter, the client, if you like, begins the project. The architects then interpret a dream or an idea. And what they required was a new university on a very particular site in the city of Lima. And the content of the schedule of accommodation was a series of big laboratories, small laboratories, lecture rooms, libraries. And our interpretation, if you like, the struggle, those DNA sketches, as we began to think deeply about this project, we were also considering a city that we didn't know. So these drawings were really ours, if you like, at the initial discussion, looking at the context. This is the Pacific, these are the cliffs, this is the little valley that we're making, if you like, a new university. And when we, like the Russian dolls that fit one inside the other, by looking at the section and seeing smaller on top of bigger and getting smaller and smaller, and then also the analysis of that particular site, which on one side had an incredibly busy motorway, and then the other side had a very beautiful area called Barranco, which is a low-lying, dense residential area of Lima. We came up with this strategy, saying that we could have a hard shoulder, a crust, a new cliff, a hill to the busy side of at the motorway, and then use the cascading gardens down to Barranco. So these, I mean, going back to interpreter, these are the kind of hieroglyphics, these are the kind of struggles that architects have when we're trying to find something, if you like, of symbolic meaning for ourselves, but also in terms of usefulness to hold a new creation together. And these are other drawings. This is a photographic collage between the Pacific Ocean moving into the site. And also what's really amazing for us is that there's only 9 millimeters of rain per year in Lima. I mean, we come from an island in the Atlantic where the rain is slightly more than 9 millimeters. And here is for us, we were looking at sketches where when El Niño happens, that the building itself could become a kind of a cascade of this heavy rain to deal with. I mean, this is a building we're building with no insulation and no DPCs, no water protection. So for us, it's an amazing experience. We also trawled into what comes up, I suppose, in the kind of dust and drudgery and drudge of architectural education is these yellowed pages of early works of Corp. This is in his sketches in Rio de Janeiro, large-scale projects. And also projects, this is a project built in the 1960s, 70s by Neve Brown in London, Alexandra Road, which is about 300 meters of housing against a railway built on rubber to sustain the impact of the trains. And also this beautiful, I'm sorry, not a very good image, but this beautiful project in Braga of the stadium by Soto de Mora, which is really, I suppose for us, the question arose then, and we asked ourselves, could a university not be an office park, not be a place where students pressed a button and got into an elevator and went to a class? Was there something in this particular site, in this particular culture of Lima, where the Humboldt coal stream keeps the temperature at in such a benign level that you could actually think of a project where the structure and the organization of circulation allowed for an infrastructure of a university to be a stadium for learning. And that we took this section, this diagram here, and we held this kind of sure-footed building. This is also a seismic area. Lima is seismic. So we had this idea that we would make the heavier pieces to the lower ground, that the laboratories would move up, the bigger ones, the smaller ones, up to the library, and that each of the roofs actually provided the surface. So every surface had a job to do. In terms of a plan, this is, if you like, the ground plan. This is the busy motorway here. We have the entrance, and we have placed the public uses on the easily accessible ground floor, and the upper levels, which are the other rooms, the other educational rooms, are strung over these structures at 20 meter dimension. And this image for us is really important. I mean, we're talking today about interpreters and stories and hearing stories. When we were doing this competition, only one of the architects in our office had spent time in Peru. And her report and spending time there of the fog in Lima, the sociability, the type of people the Peruvians are, where outside is a pleasant place to socialize. So when this drawing was being made with the busy road below the vertical circulation, this was really trying to capture the atmosphere of this particular place on Earth. So going back to the cliffs, this segment here is the color of the existing cliffs, these 40-meter cliffs in Lima. And we were taking a concrete structure. That concrete would reinterpret, if you like, the natural ingredients of the gravel and the gravel pieces which make these beautiful cliffs, incorporating it into the project, cascading the project down these cascading gardens into Barranco. This is a view of the library using those other surfaces and viewing out over the terrain of the city of Peru. And also in terms of the Pacific and the socializing possibilities of outside circulation. So the whole project has the only interior worlds are the worlds of the specialist rooms of laboratories and libraries, and the circulation is exterior. And we've made this level 5. We're trying to, if you like, what we've talked about, making the new geography or making this new arena for learning, that on certain levels that we try to, if you like, have a connection not only to the distant views but also to the immediate surroundings. This is a view from the motorway, seeing the kind of outer crust of the building and the scale of a school of engineering. And this for us was a very important perspective drawn during the competition, where we're really trying to capture the kind of essence of the life of a country where outside and inside you can blur the architectural distinctions between the two, we're in a place of education, that a laboratory is not something to be buried and hidden away, but is a place of learning, and that these amazing machines for the engineers would be on display. So when you're having a cup of coffee, when you're moving with your colleague through this precinct, that the if you like, the content of the education is on display. This was our section for the competition. The heavier auditoria rooms down below, the laboratories, moving up to the smaller laboratories, right up to the building, and having this, if you like, this open section. And I'd like to read something which was really very important for us, discovery as we were doing this project, and also in terms of the Biennale. We talk about the plan as being based on logic and the section being based on emotion. And there's a wonderful book by Annette Spiro, the Swiss architect, and her research into the Sculptural Museum in São Paulo by Mendes de Rocha. She states, and I quote, "We are accustomed to perceiving spatial depth through perspective or through the placement of volumes in space. Paulo Mendes de Rocha uses neither one means or the other, and nonetheless generates spatial depth upon the confined urban parcel. He shifts the horizon into the building's interior with a series of sections and invents in contrast to the free ground plan, the free section." So Annette Spiro's description of this free section articulates clearly a concept of space, especially in places where climate is benign and the people relaxed and sociable. In our university in Lima, our intention is to use the free section to allow culture, the culture of Lima, to permeate the new imagined campus, to encourage life to happen in the new territory made, to create a new geography, new platforms for students to be aware of their own unique place on this planet. The role of structure, architect's constant companion, imagines new possibilities, spanning, lifting, hovering. It allows the free section to be. We ourselves have learned from building, particularly the Bocconi project, that structure is melted and dissolved by light, and structure makes space that allows life to happen. We found that in the void created by our aula magna's undercroft, it attracts activities that it would have been impossible to imagine. It is a space that activates a type of primal response, capturing volume, holding space under the 22-meter cantilever in the city of Milan. So as we progress this project, just to say that it has its architectural license, the bulldozers have arrived on site. These are our sections as we develop. There were three things we further discovered as we developed this project, three issues to do with Lima city. It has three distinct things in this site. It has noise from the motorway, it has dust because it's built essentially on a desert, and the third thing is humidity. So as we develop our section, we're keeping the new ground on the fifth level, but we're introducing these smaller rooms as acting as, if you like, controllers of sound buffers from the motorway. And this is another section as we're studying it. These are every 10 meters, these structures. This is like a scaffolding for the university itself. We have the next one where you see the separating joint. This is the separating of the groundworks from the building above. This is the seismic line. This is where the building will be on seismic isolators at this point. So this is a section showing the circulation up through the building. And here you see the ground, the big laboratories, the interconnecting laboratories which have a small courtyards moving up, and their the smaller education rooms to the library on top. And this image, if you like, for us, this paper model describing the project, the heavy crust, the kind of, if you like, heavy shoulder that explains or expresses the university to the city of Lima, but also these cascading spaces down to Barranco, this very beautiful 19th century, essentially the 19th century part of Lima itself.
We'd just like to finish with this idea ruin to realization. And we're talking about this because the Venice Biennale came at a time when the Lima project was very new, wasn't really fully born or fully formed. And we found that we were making exploratory elements which felt like ruins of the future in a sense. But we were also visiting Lima at the time, and we were really struck by this amazing monument which is called Huaca. And there are many of these in Peru, and I'm sure there's many of you in the audience who know about them. But what we found amazing was that these are monumental, but they don't assert power. And they feel like they're collectively built, which they are, made from mud bricks and built by the community. And we hear lots of different reasons as to why they're built. One being that it's to balance man with nature. And the other is that they're burial or they're burial sites and sacred sites. But what we found amazing was this thing of an organic monument. And then at the same time we were looking at, in more detail, sorry, the text is gone from the right, but it's Skellig Mihill on the right, which is out on the Atlantic Ocean, an island with a 6th century settlement of monks, and Machu Picchu on the left. And when we were doing the competition again, we got great courage from finding these comparative cultural landscapes and feeling that perhaps it was possible, and perhaps we did have something in common with Peru, and perhaps that was humanity and habitation and how one occupies ground. But it was also, we're also looking at these images because of the hostility, in a sense, of the site that we were dealing with in Lima. And we felt that what was amazing about both of these images was that thing of intimacy within an enormous landscape. And it didn't seem to have that in either of these sites, there didn't seem to exist a kind of middle ground. And William Curtis talks beautifully about this, where he talks about platform and horizon. And he writes about Machu Picchu in this context, about the platform and the intimate space within the huge horizon. So we were looking at this for cultural reasons and picturesque reasons, but not only for that, because we were also thinking, I suppose we always think about the landscape of the city as being a landscape. It's just a man-made landscape, and it can be inspired by the landscapes in the open countryside or in the Atlantic Ocean, simply in terms of that idea of habitation. And we found ourselves making these, again, fragments which felt like ruins, and because they were fragments, they left room for us to imagine what the project might become. And because we were using the Venice Biennale, the common ground, to pay homage to Paulo Mendes de Rocha, this football stadium is one of the first images that we saw of his work, and we were really, again, struck by the power of that space, and also in reading about it that it was really making a social space in the undercroft of the stadium. But what we found about making these parts was studying the structure of our own project and how it would meet the ground and what form the spaces might take and how the escape stairs would attach themselves leech-like to the primary structure. We were also building models and studying the work of Paulo Mendes de Rocha, which was a real liberation. And we found to our surprise that the only thing we could access of this project was a sketch section. There were no drawings, so we were trawling through Google Earth, trying to find dimensions, which we established and made measured drawings and sent them to him, and he didn't answer, so we presumed they were okay. And we met Paulo Mendes de Rocha once through Skype, and he said, "Do what you want with the work, it's open to you." We said, "Is that not a bit dangerous?" He said he liked danger, and anyway, he thought women were quite dangerous. So that was the kind of extent of our conversation. But it's just amazing amazing admiration from a distance. We did actually get one response when we told him we had won the Golden Lion. He sent, and could we have a photograph? He sent us this really dreamy photograph of himself where he looked really handsome. And this is he is handsome anyhow, but this is the study of his football stadium. And we found it really enriching to be studying, and we made a model also of the sports pavilion. And he talks about making cave architecture or making buildings feel like a tent. So there was that parallel thing of looking at ruins of the future and of the past, and looking at our own project trying to be realized from its kind of initial stages. And again, coming back to Louis Kahn and Salk, we loved this image of the kind of infinite, unending space, and the fact that it's the space in the shadows and in the shade. And we found our project was somehow developing in a way like that. And the ribbed slab, which we're using, gives another kind of sense of the tent-like spaces of Mendes de Rocha, and the interweaving of the landscape with the interior world which we're developing, and the more enclosed spaces than in competition stage because of the climate, but also because of a wish to make maybe a space which is more cohesive and less dramatic and vertiginous than our early images. And I'd just like to finish with a quote from Baudelaire, where he talks about modernity in the painter of modern life as the fleeting, the transitory, the contingent. It is one half of art, of which the other half is the eternal and the unchanging. Thank you.
So Kenneth, as is his way, will respond.
I want to escape. Yes. Well, first of all, I want to thank you both for a very inspiring lecture, and also for accepting the invitation and also coming here. I know how busy you are, and also the fact you have to leave tomorrow. You can't hear. Is that better? Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I never get it near enough. All right. I was saying that I think, first of all, I want to thank them both for a very inspiring lecture, and also for the effort, for accepting this invitation, for coming here. You know, they as you can imagine, they are extremely busy architects, and they have to leave tomorrow. So that's the first thing I would like to say. And secondly, of course, I want to thank Mark Weekly for this very gracious introduction. Times going over the top, which is one of his habits, and as he once said to me a long time ago, very intimately, I don't have any off button. Anyway, but this was a very beautiful and yes, talk about being able to play with words, and I think that this whole issue about words and writing and building, and then when it comes to playing with words, of course, the Irish have no, there's no one else who can play with words quite like the Irish, and it is one of the pleasures of going to Ireland, I think, because of this playfulness with words, and Dublin is full of that. I wanted also to say that I realized that I've known you almost for, I don't know, getting on to a quarter of a century, because I first saw the work of Shelley and Yvonne in Temple Bar in Dublin. I think they belonged to a Group 91. This was maybe some of you know it, it's a kind of refurbishing of an old warehouse area and turning it into a sort of small, very modest cultural core with museums of photography and film centers and various other small, very small-scale cultural and facilities with restaurants, etc., etc. It's not such an unfamiliar thing, but it has a particular charm. And in Dublin, and also their work at that time had an enormous modesty, and the way their work has developed since that time is quite extraordinary, I think. And somehow or other, yes, by some quirk of fate, I mean, I think I have at different times been involved in actually being on juries that in fact gave them prizes. So it gets to be a little suspicious if this happens the third time. I mean, you know, it will lead to legal action on the part of the losers, I think. And so that has also been a pleasure. And what they had to say reminded me very much of Grigotti's remark that architecture doesn't begin with the primitive hut, it begins with the marking of ground. And I think this is what they have to say about all of that. The earth, of course, this question, these little, I think it's very nice, this homage to David Leatherbar, who is perhaps not such a familiar person to you, but who is a very sensitive historian, writer on architecture, and is hidden away in the University of Pennsylvania. Yes, I wanted to say something also about something I feel very strongly about, which is that, and Mark in his introduction touched on this, on the difficulty of this moment of history and of the society we live in, both here but also universally, and how, you know, there is, and it's quite obvious, there is an enormous amount of building and an enormous amount of barbaric building, bad building. I mean, yes, it's unending, but at the same time, there is, you know, you can perceive all over the world, if one keeps one's eyes wide open, very sensitive work being done in unlikely spaces, unlikely places. Actually, recently I was introduced to the work of a young Bangladeshi architect. I've never seen this work, but I've seen it published, and I realized what an extraordinary quality it has. You know, one doesn't think of Dhaka as being a place that would produce such sensitive talent, but one can find this kind of talent, I think, everywhere if one looks hard enough. And in some places it has a very collective quality. I think it has had for some time, at least I think maybe for 20 years at least and more, a certain collective spiritual culture in Ireland, in Dublin in particular, and there are many, anyway, quite a large number of talented architects of different generations that are still working, and of course working individually, but also at the same time there is a very strong collective feeling, and I think that I would say in a way perhaps stronger than what one could find in London, for example, at the same time. And not that there aren't talented architects in London, but maybe that also is one of the virtues of small, relatively small, but urbane places that permit this kind of unconscious, conscious cultivation of work of quality. And when it seems to have got maybe a little warmer, but one of the, and I won't go on much longer, one of the weird things about this lecture hall is it's always freezing in here, and which reminds me of the moment that they win this competition in Milan for the Bocconi University, and the fact that I was involved in sort of with Silvia Malesi in setting up this competition and choosing 12 architects. That we tried also to choose architects that we knew but which were not, as it were, on the world map. But and And the interesting thing is, you know, who made this decision? Because, I mean, they did a very beautiful project. They're the only ones of the 12 that's the amazing thing. Sometimes one sees a collection, and also it's particularly true when it's a very limited competition and there's only like 10 or 12 people, you suddenly realize one aspect of this competition no one else could solve except one team, you know, one entry. And this was the aula magna. You know, it's amazing, the enormous struggle that these experienced architects had in other competitors to actually even solve the problem of the aula magna. I mean, and I think they, in a way, gained this competition because of this resolution of the aula magna. And but the interesting thing is that the representative of the client of the university, a certain Mr. de Blasi, researched everybody and looked at everything. And so the 12 came to Milan and they had to present in one day. And he arranged the sequence in which they were to present. And everybody else had 45 minutes, and the Irish came at the end, and there didn't seem to be any limit, you know. And so it's a question whether the jury made the decision about who, or whether Mr. de Blasi made the decision. In any case, it was a very joyous occasion, and lifted the responsibility from the jury, really, and Mr. de Blasi got what he wanted, and was, I believe, a very exacting client. Wasn't it true? And yes, the final thing, because it's partly sparked by the freezing. This hall, you know, has this. Is that at some point, you know, this is a bit too anecdotic, but I went to Rockefeller University and heard environmental engineers. This is now, I don't know, quite a while ago, and there was one young environmental engineer named Klaus Bode, and I recommended him. An engineer of German origin, very young, but living in England and practicing there. And I recommended him to Grafton architects. And they came. That was it. No one else came with an environmental engineer, but Grafton architects came to Milan with an environmental engineer. That was impressive, also. And what we need here, of course, but it's never going to happen, is an environmental engineer to rework this lecture hall. Anyway, thank you again. It's really wonderful. I don't know if there's room or time for questions, or are there any particular interventions that people would like to make?
Could I just say that we probably should have said it earlier on, that how much we deeply respect Kenneth Frampton. When we were young architects, on a small island in the Atlantic, as we said, and we read his pieces, which was really supporting critical regionalism, giving meaning to smaller places, where we were reading the work of the Swiss architects and the beautiful early work in the Tessin district. And it, if you like, helped grow the confidence and belief in architecture with the support of writing. And I think it's true of all practicing architects that sometimes you read a page, you read an insight by such a critical mind, and it sustains you not only at that moment, but for the rest of your lives. And what I find, I think is true of us, that when you read something and you witness integrity in somebody's life and a belief in the social dimension, not just of the architectonics of a building, but of the deep, deep social meaning of architecture, there's nothing but continued respect. So we're here talking about our work, but we're also paying homage to somebody who is playing an incredibly strong and important role in the world of architecture. So we'd like to thank him sincerely.
Take one question.
Oh, yes, very good.
So we need somebody to interpret for the crowd the single question that needs to be asked. So if you feel like you have the one question. Yes. You win. Yes.
Thank you. It actually, this lecture brings to mind it combines, is a bridge between what happens in terms of architecture when prehistoric man or whatever human beings had to create from the cave people, peoples of Altamira, of Ali Kosh in Iraq, or in Altamira in Spain, or Lascaux in France, or the ones that have not been discovered yet, or of Petra in Jordan, or of the Shiban Kaukaban in Yemen. And as a matter of fact, the fact that it's all encompassing in the architecture that you presented, with the references also with Lucan to Decca and to Lucan's Salk Institute, and especially to the subject of science and technology and the environment, is basically very world encompassing. So it brings to mind, it's in a nutshell, the architecture of the 21st century. The 21st century seems to be heading in a much better direction. With the guidance of Professor Frampton, I think we are very enlightened to be in this audience and to have really had the pleasure and distinguished, distinguished opportunity to listen to two women architects. I remember back in the days 10 years ago, he brought in Eva Jerica from London, and and Professor Frampton is always looking into his research to bring out the new and the enlightening in world architecture, from critical historical regionalism to the effect of environment and green architecture on the 21st century, and the importance of ground, architecture rises from the ground into the sky is what basically the new quest of the 21st century seems to be about. Thank you very much, and I'm very flattered to be in this audience. Thank you.
So, yes or no? Yes.
Question, yes.
So I've introduced a few lectures in my time, and it's so nice when the people who give the lecture make it seem like you know what you're talking about, because I think one of the key lessons of tonight is that Yvonne and Shelley are intellectuals through and through. They work with the material, but they work first with the mind. Unbelievably thoughtful lecture. I think one of the most beautiful lectures I've heard in this room. I really want to celebrate these two architects.
Thank you, Kenneth. Lovely evening.
And one more time, it's happy birthday to Kenneth.